case in Nigeria. The state in Nigeria hasn't changed at all. We had hoped that it would. We had some indications from government officials that things were advancing, but the reality is very different. In Nigeria, abductions, particularly of women and girls, are rife. Many of us will know, and they will all know, of the Chibok schoolgirl kidnapping in 2014. It made headlines when 276 mostly Christian girls were abducted by Boko Haram from their school. What hasn't made the headlines, however, is the reality of that. 8 years later, and over 100 of those girls are still missing. How hard that must be on the mums and dads and the brothers and sisters and all the families who want to know what happened to their sisters or their daughters. Regrettably, there are many cases of similar, albeit smaller scale, abductions, with girls still missing for years.
And that we must engage with that, including on decisions regarding humanitarian aid spend. This week, Bishop Jude of Owo State in Nigeria is visiting the UK. It was the church in his diocese, St Francis Xavier, where 40 were killed on Pentecost Sunday, the youngest 2 years old. He described for us yesterday the scene of carnage which met him as he entered his church. Tragically, however, that was not an isolated incident. Right across so many states in Nigeria today, Fulani jihadists, Islamic extremists, are kidnapping, ransoming and killing clergy, abducting school students, forcibly converting, that's raping and marrying Christian girls, seizing land, obliterating villages, killing whole communities and then renaming their land, dispossessing thousands who flee to live in informal IDP camps. And these aren't camps with UN support, these are often camps supported by NGOs, and where hunger, thirst, lack of shelter and fear are rife. I heard just this week of how 2 teenage boys who were hungry risked leaving the IDP camp to try to fish for food. Their bodies were returned, their heads had been split open like melons with machetes. If the minister is still unpersuaded by reports from NGOs that the root cause of the current horrendous conflict in Nigeria is not climate change, but attacks by religious extremists intent on genocidal destruction, would he perhaps support an impartial evaluation of what's currently going on in Nigeria and press for a UN Commission of Inquiry on Nigeria? And will the minister look at how addressing such freedom of religion or belief issues can be included more strongly in the wording of the revised integrated review announced by the Chancellor today?
Nigeria is 7th on the Open Doors 2022 World Watch list of the 50 countries where it's most difficult to live as a Christian. But their statistics show that if it was only measuring violence, Nigeria would actually be at the top of that list. And we've heard some very powerful and frankly horrific testimony today from both of the opening members. And it is the call to bring those responsible for genocidal attacks such as the Pentecost Sunday 2022 massacre in Nigeria, the call to bring them to justice, that is the focus of Aid to the Church and Needs petition this year. And I hope there are things that the government can do and listen to the calls that have been made, for example, addressing this question of designating Nigeria as a country of concern.
Really, I suppose we just can't keep silent. The situation in Nigeria that we've heard so much about is truly appalling. Within the period that we've been talking about, perhaps 7,000 Christians murdered. We keep referring to it, and I suppose there's a degree of hopelessness about what we can do, but should we feel hopeless? Because we've got the minister here now who has spent a lifetime of commitment to helping people in the developing world. And we do have influence because of our very large aid budgets. And I sometimes wonder whether we are using that influence the greatest effect, particularly with regards to countries like Nigeria. And there is a suspicion that the Nigerian authorities are not as zealous as they should be in cracking down on this violence, which is little less than genocide. There's very little publicity about the loss of black lives in Africa, but black lives matter everywhere. They don't just matter in the West. They, as I've said before, they matter equally in Africa. When people are being murdered simply for their faith, we should call this out, and our government should call it out in its relations with Nigeria. And I'm sure the Minister will say later that we do that.
I note the comments made by others that Nigeria tops the list of the most violent persecution of Christians, and all free and democratic members of the international community must have that information in the forefront of their minds in any dealings with Nigeria or any such state, and take concentrated and concerted action to challenge and tackle this, because hand-wringing and finger-wagging is not working. Nations from Myanmar to Nigeria, Kashmir to Ethiopia, Afghanistan to Somalia, from India to Pakistan, Saudi Arabia to Iran, at least 360 million Christians have experienced high levels of persecution and discrimination this year alone. 20 million more than in 2021. So persecution of Christians is growing, it is not decreasing. Every day, around 13 Christians are killed because of their faith. Every day, 12 churches or Christian buildings are attacked. Every day, 12 Christians are unjustly arrested or imprisoned, and another 5 are abducted. The problem is getting worse.